If you asked a fan of Thomas what the most underrated episode of the show is, you'd probably get a widespread of answers. Today, I will be discussing what my pick for the most underrated episode is. That episode is... Forever and Ever. Nah, just kidding. It's Which Way Now. Which Way Now is an episode starring Rusty. In this episode, Rusty has been asked to take Sir Topham Hatt's family to the lake. However, while working with the workmen, Rusty rushes them so that he will be on time for the Fat Controller, only to arrive early. After the family arrives, they climb aboard Rusty and Rusty drops them off, and then he goes back to his job. After finishing his job, Rusty arrives at the cafe, only to find that Sir Topham Hatt isn't there. Rusty goes looking for them. After asking some tourists, he notices that they are all in the wrong place, and realizes that the workmen had put the signs in the wrong direction, because he had made them rush. After realizing his mistake, he finds Sir Topham Hatt's family at the farm, and they tell him that they had fun despite the mix-up. Let's go into why this episode is so underrated. First of all, let's talk about the main character himself, Rusty. Some people have said that Rusty was out of character, but for me, it's his role in the story that makes it so great. At the start, he's rushing the workmen so that he will be on time for Sir Topham Hatt, who is the chairman of the railway and the controller of the Northwestern Railway, as well as the former controller of the Skarloey Railway. And we know how much he hates it when engines are late, such as in the grand opening when he tells Skarloey off for being late even though it wasn't his fault.
"You're late for the announcement," complained the Fat Controller. "Really useful engines are never late." "I'm sorry, sir."
So I can understand why Rusty wouldn't want to be late for him. I might be looking too deep into this, but having this in mind makes the episode all the more enjoyable. After that, when Sir Topham Hatt isn't at the cafe, he immediately goes out to look for him. If this were Duncan, he probably would have assumed that he arrived early and wait all day for him, only for Sir Topham Hatt to not show up, and then he would go looking for him. Rusty looks all over the island and notices that the campers, skiers, and fishermen are in the wrong places, and then realizes what is going on. He then goes back to the place, notices where the sign is placed, and finds Sir Topham Hatt's family. I really like this more observant... is that even the word? I really like this more observant side of Rusty. I think it really suits him. I don't know why. I just do. Anyways, that's all I have to say about Rusty. Now on to the other thing I like about this episode, the morals. Now, I know, throughout seasons 1 to 5, the morals were very minor and weren't the focus of attention. And as much as this era focuses a lot on morals, I kinda like it. In the Miller era, the morals were bashed into the audience's heads and it became very repetitive. But here, it's done tastefully and makes for a great lesson. Which Way Now has two morals. One has been done to death in not just Thomas, but in other kid shows, and the other isn't really taught very often. The first moral is obvious: don't rush your work. I know that this moral has been told to death already, especially in the Hit era, but I think the way it was handled is what makes it so strong. Let's compare it to another episode in that era, that being Thomas Gets It Right. In that episode, it takes way too much time to get to the point and feels really boring. It's one of those few seasons 8 through 11 episodes that would work better with the shorter runtime. But in this episode, it doesn't take too long to get to the point and feels really impactful as a result. I'll talk more about the pacing later on. Now on to the second moral, which is, sometimes a mistake can be a blessing in disguise. I think the previous moral helps emphasize this one, and the fact that it's not taught often makes it all the more special. I love how it's handled. Again, the episode takes its time to get to the main point. The The Runaway Elephant kinda does this, but not as good as this episode in my opinion. I also like how the moral isn't flat out stated, which is a big problem with this era and Season 7. Instead, it just takes its time to reveal the mistake and lets the viewer try and figure out the moral themselves. Alright, now that we're done with the main reasons I love this episode, let's talk about a few small things I like about it. First of all, I like the flow of the story. It takes its time to get to the main point. This is one of the few times where the 3 strikes formula isn't too bad here. Each strike starts and ends incredibly quickly, unlike Don't Be Silly Billy or Thomas's Frosty Friend, where the 3 strikes formula completely drag out the story. I think this is one of the few episodes that works better with the 7-minute runtime. Try and crush it down into 4.5 minutes. It would honestly feel very rushed. Trust me, I tried doing that myself, and I'm not super happy with the result. Link in the description. Other great examples of 3 strikes formula use are Emily's New Route, Percy and the Oil Painting, and Thomas and the Storyteller. I also like how this episode leaves the audience wondering for a while, what mistake did Rusty make? They don't show us any implication, they just show us a few clues that aren't too obvious. I also really like the sets. I think the Scarlet Railway in particular looks amazing throughout all of seasons 9 through 10, and this episode is no exception. Look at this viaduct, look at this set, look at this one, look at that cafe. There's just so much to like. It's a shame season 11 didn't stick to this greatness. My only real gripe with this episode is the title, which is a big problem with this era. What does that have to do with this episode? No one even says that throughout it. It honestly should have been called Rusty Rushes It. Now wouldn't that have been better? Anyway, let's conclude. This episode is a masterpiece. The story is well paced, well structured, and has a great use of the 3 strikes formula. It has great model work, morals, and it set up the main character perfectly. It keeps Rusty close to his classic character while also having him being flawed. If you dislike this episode, maybe you should think again. I hope those of you who are watching have understood my points and why this episode is so underrated. Until next time, goodbye.